Hi, I'm Cassie with Me Time. This is a tutorial for the Collectible Christmas Village Church, released November 2022. I'm going to walk you through the entire process, step by step. The techniques in this tutorial apply to all of the Holiday Village buildings from Collectible Christmas. The sections of this tutorial, which have corresponding timestamps along the timeline below, are prep work, embroidering the back, embroidering the front, embroidering the roof, embroidering the steeple walls, embroidering the steeple roof, sewing the church together, and then assembling the church. Shapeform interfacing is a stiff stabilizer. It is also malleable and it can be bent and cut and used in many different ways. In Collectible Christmas, we do cut through this, we stitch on it, and it is bent when we're turning the roofs. All of these things are okay. After you have bent or moved your shapeform, it can be ironed and it will be flat and just perfect again. When you are sent your Collectible Christmas envelope, inside you will have your pre-cut kit sizes. These are going to be the same cut sizes for all of the holiday buildings throughout the entire year. Inside, you're going to have your shape form and any of the other fabrics or embellishments that you need, all in a standard cut size. But before you start making your buildings, they need to be cut down to the cut size. These will be listed on your materials list on page 4 of the instructions. Now, I know the natural tendency is to add fusible backing to the fabric, but we are not going to do that for the holiday houses because it adds unnecessary bulk. Instead, we're just going to use our favorite starch. Any will do that you prefer. So we're going to take each of our pieces and starch them and then press them so they're nice and flat. We just make them nice and stiff so they're easier to work with and that they'll lay nicer on the houses. The most important thing to starch, however, is actually your chiffon. It's really fluttery and it needs to be a little bit more stiff when we work for it. For the village church, there are 3 pieces of chiffon. 2 of them you will fold in half and starch, and 1 of them you will starch nice and flat. So when you starch it, fold it in half at the beginning, spray it generously, and then iron that nice and flat. And suddenly that really nice fluttery chiffon is stiff and it's easier to work with. Now that we've finished all of our prep work, it's time to start embroidering the back of the church. We're going to start by hooping light mesh cutaway stabilizer and loading our file into our embroidery machine. Direction step 3, which is the first step on the embroidery machine, is used with a visible thread. I've chosen green to be our visible thread to start off today. This first step, it's important to use that visible thread because later on when we stitch these houses together, this line right here is our stitch line and we need to make sure that we can see it so we can put these houses together correctly. After we've stitched our visible thread step, we're going to place our shape form completely covering that placement line. And we're going to secure it with some tape. This way it won't shift while it's stitching. Then we're going to go do machine step number 2. But before we do that, we are going to trade out our thread so that we don't have our bright green shining through. And now we're going to tack down that shape form. Okay, after you have tacked down your shape form, we're going to trim it. And it is very important to trim it as close as possible. In our instructions, we say very close, and we mean that because we want to make sure we have as straight of a line as we possibly can next to the stitch line. This will help when we are folding our fabric over and when we're assembling our houses. So we're going to take our scissors and trim it up. So your direction steps 6 and 7 are going to deal right here with these two lines. These lines are your scoring guides, and we're going to do something that seems a little bit different. We're going to take a rotary cutter and we're going to cut directly between those lines all the way through the shape form and the stabilizer. This is going to help us create a wonderful edge once we are putting our house together. So it seems kind of funny to do it, but by all means, get right on in there and score it all the way through. Now we're ready to go and stitch our placement line for our fabric. Once we've stitched our placement line, we can place our fabric, ensuring that there's at least a 1/4 inch of extra fabric on all sides. Since it's already starched, we can just tape it in place. Our church is tacked down with cream thread, so we're going to change our thread out to a cream color. We're ready to stitch direction step 4, which is our tack down line. The next step is a fold line, and we can just do that straight away. The next one is direction step 6, and we're going to be stitching the window stitch lines that we're going to be cutting next. All right, it's time to cut our windows. Now there's lots of different ways to cut these windows, but the way that I have found I like the best is with a seam ripper. Now when we're cutting these windows, we're cutting all the way through the fabric, the shape form, and the stabilizer. They all gotta go. So the first thing to do is to poke your seam ripper into the corner and then gently glide it up along the seam, being careful not to cut the stitches. Then you're going to turn your hoop as you cut around the curve. And then you're going to take your seam ripper and go straight down the other side. Then again, poke it into the corner and glide it on next to the seam line. Then, if there's a little bit of threads holding it, you can just clip those and start removing your window. At this point, I like to turn it to the back so that I can make sure I get all of that stabilizer out of the window. And there we are. We're going to do that one more time. Take your seam ripper, put it in the corner. Make sure you go through all 3 layers and glide your seam ripper up. Again, as close to your stitch line as you can. Rotate your hoop. And cut out your window. I find it helps to make sure I'm rotating my hoop and keeping my seam ripper on the side that's most comfortable for me to cut on. And then there again, clip any extra threads. And we can pop out the window. Make sure you get all the shape form out of the corners. And your windows are now prepped for the next part. To put your chiffon in the windows, we're going to turn the hoop to the back. We're going to take our already starched chiffon that's folded in half and lay them over the windows. Chiffon is still a little bit slippery and it moves around, so we're gonna make sure that we tape the corners and the sides nice and taut. This is going to keep our windows from buckling while it's being stitched. Then these windows have Mylar. This is really fun. So we've taped all of that to the back, and now we're gonna tape 2 pieces of Mylar to the front. To give our church kind of a stained glass look. Because Mylar is slippery as well, we're gonna use a lot of tape to make sure it doesn't move. This next bit uses white thread, so we're gonna change our thread again. Now we're going to do machine step 7, which is going to tack down our Mylar and our chiffon. Now that we've stitched our windows down, we're going to do the detail stitch. Now that we have stitched our incredible windows, take a second and look at them. They have this beautiful stained glass look from the Mylar and this beautiful detail stitching. But we have this excess Mylar that we need to remove. Mylar is pretty amazing. It can just tear away, but you can also cut it away if you feel more comfortable. Or if a little edge stays, then you can just cut it away. So we're gonna take that and all of the excess tape and leave our beautiful windows. After we remove the excess Mylar, we need to turn the hoop to the back and cut away the excess chiffon. We're gonna also remove the tape while we're here. So just cut close to the windows, but it doesn't matter exactly how much you cut away, just as long as we're removing the excess. We also want to make sure that we don't have chiffon over this fold so that we don't have something in the way of where we scored the corners. And with that, we're ready to stitch the next part. Machine step 9 is stitching the window ledge in red. For machine step 10, we're going to switch threads to a brown color to do the satin outline for the windows. Okay, and away we go. Machine step 11 is stitching the timber detail. Now that we've finished our embroidery, it's time to take the back out of the hoop. We're going to trim away the excess stabilizer and from our stitch line about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch of the fabric on the top and the bottom, but we're going to trim right against the stitch line on both of these sides as such. It's important to leave a good amount of fabric on the top and the bottom so that we can use that for our gluing. But these sides we're going to end up sewing, so we cut nice and close. Again, we're leaving excess fabric on that top, and then we're going to cut close on this side, just like that. Now to make sure we can fold this and have crisp corners, we're going to clip some notches. We're going to clip a notch here, just like that. We're going to clip the top here, being careful not to clip the stitch lines. And we're going to give this just a little bit of an angle. Now we're ready to glue. You can use any fabric glue that you are comfortable with. We're just going to put it on these top edges. Just a little bit there, and then I like to use my sewing clips to keep that in place while it dries. So we're just going to fold it over and clip it in place. And we're going to do that all the way around except for on the two sides. A little bit there. Pull it nice and taut against that shape form and clip it in place. This is why it's so important to trim close to the shape form so that it has the right shape when we get to this part. And then we just clip it in place. Every glue has a different drying time, so make sure you know what glue you're using, the drying time is before you release your clips. We're just again going to pull it nice and taut and clip it in place. The good news is that while this is drying, you can just make the front. Now we're ready to start part 2 in the instructions, which is stitching the front. Most of the front is exactly the same as the back. All of the steps where we use the visible thread and we place the shape form and we place the fabric, all of that is exactly the same. We're going to move along right now to direction step 6, where we place the door. We've taken our front through machine steps 1 through 5, and we're ready to do machine step 6. This is the placement line for the door. Okay, after we do the machine step where we stitch the placement line for the door, we get to put the door straight on top, covering that placement line. We'll tape that in place. Now we're going to return the hoop to the machine. A machine step 7 is stitching the tack down line for the door. We're going to remove the hoop from the machine, and then we're going to trim this door close to the stitch line. It's going to have a satin stitch later, so we're going to make sure we can get as close to those stitches as possible without clipping them. Once your door is trimmed, we're going to return it back to the machine. The next step, which is machine step 8, is going to be stitching those windows stitch lines. And we're going to do these windows similarly to the windows we did for the back. So go ahead and follow those same instructions, and we'll be back with you in a minute. We have done machine steps 8 through 11. And now we're going to do 12, which is a wreath. It's a little bit different than the back because we didn't have a wreath. We're going to stitch that, and then we're going to stitch all of the door details afterwards. Okay, with that, we finished our front. All we need to do is take it out of the hoop, and then we're going to trim it up exactly like we did with the back, and then we're going to fold over the excess fabric and glue it as well. All right, we've made it to part 3, stitching the roof. First thing that we're going to do is prepare our roof eaves fabric. We're going to take them and fold them over between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch and just iron that nice and flat. If you feel like you need a little more starch, it's okay to add it at this point. Then we're going to do our other one. This is going to help us create a finished edge later on when we're further stitching our roof. Now that we have those prepped and ready to go, we can move on to the machine. We're going to start off by stitching the roof placement line and then placing the roof shape form. Okay, now that we have our placement line, we're going to take our roof shape form and cover that placement line completely and then tape it in place. After it's secured with tape, we're going to put it back in the machine and stitch the tack down line. After we stitch that tack down line, we're going to trim it just like we did with the front and the back of the church, as close as we can to that stitch line. The roofs also have the scoring guidelines to create those wonderful peaks. To make sure that they are nice and crisp, we're going to again use a rotary cutter and we're going to cut all the way through the stabilizer and the shape form. Again, it's okay if you cut a little bit past, and you are welcome to cut all the way through. It is part of it. It is a good thing. All right, at this point, we're going to put it back in the machine and stitch our placement line for our roof glitter. Now that we've stitched our placement line, we can place our glitter. This is also the same for any of the other houses if you are placing fabric instead. We're going to make sure we completely cover the placement line, and we're going to tape it in place. Just make sure it's nice and taut. And then after we have it all nice and taped, we're going to put it back in the machine for the tack down line. Machine step 5 is all of the decorative detail for the roof. Machine step 6 is stitching the center fold line. After we stitch the center fold, we're going to place the roof eaves. We've already prepared them so they're ready to go straight on. We're going to place one right in about the center, making sure that we're covering the placement lines, and the other we're going to place over the top of that fold. And then we're going to do a little bit of extra taping. What we don't want to do is our pressure foot to catch any of these edges. So we're going to make sure that we tape them here on both sides. And then we add a little bit of extra tape here and over here so that we don't have the risk of our pressure foot catching any of those folds. And then it's back into the machine for our final outline stitch. Okay, now that we have finished the outline stitch, we can take the roof out of the hoop and we're going to show you how to trim it and flip it so that it is the right direction for our church. We're going to take our scissors and we're going to trim it about 1/4 inch away from that final outline stitch. We are cutting through all layers and the stabilizer at the same time. And then after we're done with that, we can remove the tape. After we've removed the tape, we're going to clip our corners to reduce bulk and also angle it about 1 inch on both sides so that we have nice crisp corners. So we're just take the scissors like this, and then we can go and reduce the bulk on each side. Now the main thing to remember here is to not clip your stitches, even though we're cutting very close to them. And we're going to do this on all 4 corners. We'll just sweep those corners away, and now we get to show you how to turn these roofs, which is really fun. So all we do is we stick our 2 fingers inside of the fold, and we're going to put our thumbs on each of the corners. we're going to press our thumbs and pop the roof. How awesome is that? Really simple. We're gonna do it on the other side as well. Again, place your fingers inside, put your fingers on the corners, push the corners through, and pop, we've turned our roof. At this point, we will use a blunt tip to poke out our corners so they lay nice and beautiful. Now, one thing to remember is this is one layer of fabric, and so we want to do this gently so that we don't poke a hole through our fabric. We do not recommend adding fusible backing to the roof because it will add unnecessary bulk. Just be careful when you're making your corners. To finish off our roof, we're going to take both eaves and pull it toward the center, nice and taut, and then we're gonna iron that nice and flat. Because the glitter is on the other side, we don't have to worry about using a pressing cloth at the moment, but we will use a pressing cloth when we do the glitter side of this. And again, use your favorite starch, whatever you like. But starching it is going to help reduce the amount of fabric that you'll see hanging down. Something to keep in mind is that the glitter is thin right here where we scored the shape form. So make sure you don't put pressure on that and let the glitter cool all the way down. When the glitter is warm, it makes it a little bit more malleable and stretchy and it could be broken through. So once you have it ironed, just lay it flat and let it cool down. All right, now we're ready to do part 4, which is embroidering the steeple walls. We're going to start again with our light mesh stabilizer, and we're going to stitch that placement line before we place the shape form. So we're going to take our shape form and place it directly over that placement line. We're going to tape it in place. Once it's taped in place, we're going to put it back in the machine for the tack down line. Okay, something to note with the steeple walls is that instead of one set of scoring guides, there are 3. You have one here, here, and here. All of them need to be cut just like we did with the front and the back and the roof. Same story. We're going to do that now. Once your shape form is all trimmed, it's back in the machine for the placement line. Okay, now we will place the steeple wall fabric covering that placement line on all sides. We'll tape it in place and then we'll put it back in the machine for the tack down line. All right, so direction step 5 for the steeple walls is to stitch the fold lines. At this point, we're going to trim the walls exactly the same as we did the front and the back of the church, trimming close on those sides and then leaving the extra fabric on the top and the bottom. So now we can do that. We're going to trim close here and then leave the excess fabric here, trim close here, and then leave the excess fabric here. After this, we can remove any excess tape and clip the corners so that we can turn the fabric properly. We're going to clip straight here in the middle, as close as we can without clipping the threads. Same here. And then we're going to clip a notch at the top of these stitch lines right here. So a notch there, and a notch there, and then one last notch here. And that's going to help us when we're gluing the walls so that we can have nice crisp corners and peaks. And then we glue just like before. Part 5 is stitching the steeple roof. Now this is a little bit different where we don't have shape form in this part of the roof. We only have glitter and chiffon, but I promise it's gonna work. We're going to start with hooping our light mesh stabilizer, and then we're going to stitch our placement line. Okay, we're going to take our glitter and place it on top of our placement line, completely covering it on all sides. We're going to tape it down to secure it in place. Then we're going to put it back into the machine and do the tack down line. Direction step 3 is stitching the fold lines. Machine step 4 is stitching the roof detail. Now that we've stitched our detail stitch, we're going to place the chiffon. We don't need another placement line because it's already there. If you haven't yet starched and pressed your chiffon into a flat square, go ahead and do that now. After that has been done, you can place it over the glitter and tape it in place. Now we can take it and stitch the final outline. Now we can remove our project from the hoop. We're going to take our scissors and we're going to trim near the final outline stitch about 1/4 inch away. And we are cutting through all of the layers. What we're going to do next is take the chiffon and fold it out of our way. And then we're going to trim just the glitter and the stabilizer next to that tack down line. Just like that. At this point, I like to turn my roof over so that I can see these 3 fold lines. It's at those points that we're going to clip notches, being careful not to cut that stitch line. Now we leave the chiffon long so that we can have that excess when we're sewing this roof together later on. We're going to do a little trim on the corners, just like that. Part 6 is assembling the church. The first thing we're going to do is stitch the front and the back pieces together. If you remember right, when we stitched them at the beginning, we used a visible thread. This is where it's important. If you look, there are 2 stitches here visible with that green thread. The first one here is the tack down line for the shape form. The second one right next to it right here is our stitch line, and that is what we're going to sew on to make sure that we assemble our church correctly. Now that we have stitched our stitch lines, the front and the back are together, and we can remove our clips that we used to hold them in place. After we've sewn our 2 pieces together, it's time to turn the building. First things first, you put your hands on both sides and kind of give it a little bit of a pop to create some space in between. Then you take a point. It doesn't matter which point you use, it can be either one, but you put the point through first. And kind of take it as far as you can, and then you take the next point and take it as far as you can. Now remember, shape form is able to be moved all about and then ironed back nice and flat. So this is a totally safe process. And there you go. The next part that needs to be assembled are the steeple walls. We simply take the steeple walls and fold it in half and line up those stitch lines. And then we take our sewing clips and clip them in place And then after that, we can go to the sewing machine and do a simple stitch. The steeple roof is next. We're going to take the chiffon and we're going to pull it over to the opposite side so the glitter is up. Now these glitter edges in here need to be ironed flat. We're going to iron each of these tabs down so that they stay in place while we sew the roof. Just like that. Now the steeple roof is kind of like the walls. We're going to fold it in half and clip it in place. It's okay that there's all this extra chiffon. That just makes it easier when we're sewing. So we're going to put a sewing clip here and there. And then we're going to sew along the stitch line here and we'll have a cute little cone-shaped roof. After we've stitched our little seam, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to trim that extra chiffon away. And then we're going to clip this corner close to the stitches to reduce the bulk so that we can get a nice point and a little bit right there. After we have sewn our steeple roof and trimmed it, we can turn it inside out. We'll remove our clips, put our fingers in, and remember it's delicate, so do this kind of gently. And move it until you can. And then take your blunt tip and gently move the fabrics until you get a nice point. Just like that. Before we finish gluing everything together, we're going to iron all of the corners to make them nice and crisp. So what I like to do is spray my corners with my favorite starch, and using a pressing cloth to protect the mylar, we're going to iron these edges nice and straight. So we've pressed the body of the building, the steeple walls, and the roof. So we come to the steeple roof, and this we can't starch and press because it's made out of glitter. So we're going to use a pressing cloth and just pinch our seams, and we're going to hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds to adhere the glitter and to also create that crisp look. Then we're going to move and finger press the next seam and hold again for a few seconds until we move all the way around that steeple. Okay. Ta-da! At this point, it's time to glue the roof onto the walls of your building. We're going to use whichever glue that you prefer and just put a generous amount along the edges. Now remember that each glue has its own drying time, and before you start gluing your roof, you should make sure you know how long you're going to need to stay there and hold it before you go anywhere else. You don't want to let go and have your roof pop and not stay nice and pretty. So after we have our edges glued, we're going to take our roof. So it's important to remember when we're putting the roof on that this fold that's on top needs to be at the front of the building so that we don't see this little gap, and that the one underneath is toward the back. So we're going to take it and we're going to line up our peaks. Just like that. And then we're going to set it nice and flat and hold it until the glue is sufficiently dry. The next piece to glue is the top of the steeple roof to the walls. So again, add your glue. And then we're going to line up the seams. Both of these pieces had a seam that we stitched, so we're going to make sure that those seams are lined up. So that seam matches this seam. And then we're going to place our roof on top and wiggle it into place, being careful not to squish this, because remember, it's just glitter and chiffon. And then when we're satisfied, we're going to hang on to it until the glue is sufficiently set. All right, The next piece to glue is the church walls to the roof of the church. So again, apply your glue of choice all around the edges. And then just like before, we're going to need to hold it until the glue is sufficiently set. So we like to make sure that the seams are in the back, just so that they're not visible. And then center your walls on your church and hold it in place until it's dry. Thank you so much for joining me today for this Collectible Christmas Holiday Village tutorial. I hope you'll check out our other tutorials and like and subscribe and follow us on all of our social media platforms. We have YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and we'd love to see you all there. Now go enjoy some well-deserved me time.